let's start the today's session. In today's session, I will be discussing about the mechanism of regulations of human respiration. So, first of all, we need to know what is the importance of the regulation of respiration, or what is the objective of regulation of respiration. The main objective of regulation of respiration is to maintain the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, oxygen and pH of blood. So here the regulations are basically two different types. So what are the different types of regulation? That is the neural regulation and chemical regulations. The term implies that the neural regulations is the regulations which is basically carried out into the central nervous system, right? And chemical regulations, the regulations which involve some receptor called chemoreceptor. Now we will discuss about the different type of chemoreceptor that regulates the respiration. We will also discuss about the molecular mechanisms of regulation of breathing under different conditions, like whenever there is a reduced oxygen, more carbon dioxide and more pH. So this is the objectives. The objectives of regulations of respiration is to maintain the normal level of PCO2 and PO2, right? So here, as I mentioned, the neural regulations, it is basically composed of three different types. One is voluntary control, involuntary control and peripheral neural reflex. So in today's discussion, I am going to discuss about the chemical regulations only, not the neural regulation, right? So here the neural regulations that depends on the chemoreceptor, right? So what is the features of the chemoreceptor, or what is the features of receptor that involves with the regulations of respirations by means of chemical control? So here chemoreceptors are those which can sense the changes of concentration of different type of chemicals, right? So here in case of respiration, the most important types of chemicals involved are carbon dioxide, oxygen and H+ ion concentration. So here the chemoreceptors can sense the changes, the concentrations of all those gaseous molecules along with the pH or along with hydrogen ion concentration, right? Now question is, what are the different sites of chemical regulations? Where the chemoreceptors are present, right? Based on the locations of chemoreceptors, they are divided into two types. One is called peripheral chemoreceptor, another one is central chemoreceptor. The peripheral chemoreceptors are those which are present in the periphery, right? Whereas central chemoreceptors are those which are present in the central nervous system. Now let me show you what is the exact locations of peripheral chemoreceptor and what are this. What is the exact locations of central chemoreceptor and what is the locations of the central chemoreceptor. See here in this figure, the most important type of peripheral chemoreceptors are aortic body, right? That is present in the aortic arc or arc of aorta. And another important type of peripheral chemoreceptors is carotid body, which is basically present in the bifurcations of common carotid artery, right? So here, as I mentioned, the chemical chemoreceptor are basically, or peripheral chemoreceptors are basically present outside the central nervous system, right? Right? So here, the two most important type of peripheral chemoreceptors are aortic bodies and another one is carotid bodies. So here, both the aortic bodies and carotid bodies is equally important to maintain the rate of ventilation, to maintain the concentration of oxygen as well as carbon dioxide, right? There are some nerve fibers which played an important role in the regulations of, or in the chemical regulations of respirations. So what are these nerve fiber? These are basically afferent nerve fiber, right? Or sensory nerve fibers. One nerve fiber that originates from aortic bodies, right? It is basically the vagus nerve. So here, the nerve fiber which originates from the vagus and its aortic bodies, it is vagus nerves. It carries some impulses called neuronal impulses, right? Similar to vagus nerve, there is another nerve that is called glossopharyngeal nerve. And this glossopharyngeal nerves is basically originated from carotid bodies, right? So here, see, both the nerve fiber are equally important because it carries some impulses or neuronal impulses based on the amount of carbon dioxide, amount of oxygen presence in the aorta, because they carry the signals as a response, right? That reach to the higher center. The higher center is basically nothing. It is the respiratory center. This respiratory center is located into the medulla oblongata, right? I just try to brief the things again. As I mentioned, the chemical regulations involve some receptors. These are called chemoreceptors. Based on the locations of those chemoreceptors, they are divided into two types. Some are called peripheral chemoreceptors, some are called central chemoreceptors. So if you see the characteristic features of peripheral chemoreceptors are mainly two types. Again, it is classified based on the locations, how it is located. So what we have seen, the main locations of peripheral chemoreceptors are aortic bodies, which is present in the arc of aorta, as well as another one is carotid bodies. This is just the bifurcation of common carotid artery, right? So these two are the most important site, so-called the chemoreceptor or peripheral chemoreceptors. And these two sites is important is because both the sites act as a site of nerve innervation, right? Both the sites act as a site from where two important nerve fiber originates, which carries the nerve impulses. So what are those nerve fibers? So one is the vagus nerve fibers that is originated from aortic bodies, and another one is glossopharyngeal nerve that is originated from carotid bodies, right? Here both the nerve fiber carries some impulse that ultimately sends to the higher center or higher respiratory center. So what is the highest respiratory center here? The higher respiratory center is basically located into the medulla as well as pons. But here these nerve fiber sends the impulse to the medulla oblongata only, right? Now, the cells that are present into the aortic and carotid bodies played an important role. Now, question is, what is the important type of cell that regulate the concentration of oxygen in aorta or in artery? Yes, if you see the cellular features of aortic bodies and carotid bodies, you will find some special type of cell, right? The type of cell that are present in both the aortic bodies and carotid bodies are called glomus cell, right? Now let me explain what is the features of the glomus cell, or what are the different types of glomus cells and how they regulates, how they maintains the partial pressure of oxygen, right? Actually, if you see the characteristics of glomus cell, or if you see the action of peripheral chemoreceptors, they act or they shows maximum activity under certain conditions. Conditions is when there is a reduced oxygen or when there is a partial pressure of oxygen is below normal, right? Here the name of the cell is type 1 glomus cell, right? And type 2 glomus cell. Here the type 1 glomus cell is mainly important to regulate the ventilation process. On the other hand, the type 2 glomus cell acts as a protective cell. It gives protection to the type 1 glomus cell. Now let me show you the features of type 1 glomus cell. Suppose this is type 1 glomus cell. Like other cell types, these cells also contains the cell organelles or other matters that are present like in normal cells. But the specialty of these cells is it contains some granules, right? It contains some special granules. These granules are nothing. These granules actually act as a neurotransmitter, right? I repeat, these glomus cells are basically found in both the aortic bodies and carotid bodies. That is why these cells are also known as peripheral chemoreceptor cells. These are nothing, these are neuronal cells only, right? So what is the features of this glomus cell? The features is, like other cells, it contains all the materials along with some granules. And these granules are nothing, these granules are neurotransmitter, which is very much essential for the transmission of impulse from one cell to other, right? Another important features of this glomus cell is it contains some ionic channel, right? It contains some ionic channel, and those channel are present in the membrane of this glomus cell. So what are the different types of ionic channel presence in the surface membrane of glomus cell? Mainly two types of ionic channels are present. The most important one is called oxygen sensitive potassium ion channel. I repeat, the most important ion channel that is present in the surface of the glomus cell is potassium ion channel, right? As I mentioned, This ion channel is oxygen sensitive. Oxygen sensitive ion channel. It means whenever there is a sufficient amount of oxygen in artery, it is going to open and it allows the efflux of potassium ion. I repeat, if the circulatory blood contains the sufficient amount of oxygen in that particular conditions, the ion channels is going to open, right? The opening of this oxygen sensitive ion channel, this is oxygen sensitive ion channel, right? Mainly it is potassium ion channel, which allows the entry as well as exit of potassium ion only. But the entry, that is influx, and exit, that is efflux, depends on the partial pressure of oxygen. If the partial pressure of oxygen is under control, if the partial pressure of oxygen is in normal level, in that particular conditions, it remains open and allows the efflux of more and more number of potassium ion. But in the opposite condition, like when there is a reduced PO2, the channel is going to close, right? Due to that, it prevents the efflux of potassium ion. So here, the efflux of potassium ion depends on the concentration of oxygen, or depends on the partial pressure of oxygen. If the partial pressure of oxygen is reduced, immediately it closes the channel and prevents the efflux of potassium ion. So as you know, the potassium ion carries the positive charge, right? So as the potassium ions are not getting out from inside, the inner membrane potentials are going to change now, because potassium ion carries some positive charges and this potassium gate is now closed. There is no efflux of potassium ion. It means the inner membrane potentials of the cells are going to change. Now it is more positive in nature. So as we know, and we also studied about the action potential, there is a phase called depolarization. Depolarization means the changes in ionic potential. So here also, due to the prevention of efflux of potassium ion, there is a changes in ionic potential called depolarizations of cell, right? This depolarization or due to depolarizations or after the phase of depolarizations, the another channel that is present in the surface membrane called calcium ion channel opens and it allows more and more number of calcium ion from outside to inside, right? Suppose this is calcium ion channel, right? Here initially the concentration of calcium ion was more in outside, but now it starts to enter inside the cell membrane with some positive charges, right? Now the concentration of calcium ion here inside the cell is more, right? This calcium ions for neuronal cells is very, very essential. So what is the role of calcium ion? The role of calcium ion, it helps the exocytosis process. As I mentioned, the inside of the glomus cells, there are some granule-like structures, and these granules are nothing. These are a neurotransmitter, right? The most important type of neurotransmitter present in the glomus cell are dopamine. Along with dopamine, there are some other neurotransmitters also present, like acetylcholine. But here, what is the role of calcium ion? The role of calcium ion is it helps the proper movements of these vascular structures towards the membrane. And these vesicles contain the granules called neurotransmitter, right? And also it helps in the exocytosis process. So here, in the outside of the cell membrane, there is a sensory neuron or afferent neuron. And these sensory neurons are nothing, these are other, this vagus nerve and glossopharyngeal nerve. What is the role of this nerve? The role of this nerve is that carries the impulses. So here, suppose this is the glossopharyngeal nerve. In this nerve ending, there are some receptors. Those are very specific to neurotransmitter. There are different types of receptors are present, but the most prevalent type of receptor presence in the neuronal membrane or in unplate membrane is the dopamine receptor or dopamine. And this acetylcholine as well as the dopamine molecule will release into this cleft region. Immediately after the release of those transmitter, they will bind to the specific receptor, right? After binding of the receptor, there is a changes in the property of this neuronal fiber, right? They start transmissions. Initially, they convert this chemical signal as a nerve impulse and transmit this impulse towards the CNS, mainly the respiratory center, right? Once it reaches the respiratory center will decide whether it needs the more ventilations or less ventilations, whether the rate and depth of respirations need to change or not. So since initially partial pressures of oxygen was less, once central nervous systems or respiratory center receive the signal, it will give the output or respond by increasing the rate of ventilations as well as the depth of ventilations. Both the rate of ventilations as well as the depth of ventilations ultimately helps to increase the concentration of oxygen that was initially less than normal. This was the condition, but here glomus cell helps to send the message to the higher center, that is the respiratory center present in medulla, and respiratory centers decides and increase the rate of ventilations as well as the depth of ventilations that ultimately helps to increase the concentration of this. Now let me show the things by using some graph. See, suppose the condition was reduced amount of oxygen, that is PO2 is less than normal. Now our system or higher center, after receiving the stimulus, it decides whether it needs to change the ventilation rate, whether it needs to change the depth of ventilation, right? Now if you see the graph here, suppose in the x-axis I am showing the partial pressure of oxygen is up to 500, right? It means in this partial pressure of oxygen, the rate of ventilation is here, suppose this is 1, which is normal. Now due to some reason, there is a decrease in oxygen concentration. Decrease in oxygen concentration means decrease in PO2 value. So now see the decrease. Up to 100 mmHg, up to 100 mmHg, the ventilation rate was normal. Here the rate of ventilation, normal rate of ventilation, suppose 1. Now suddenly the pattern of the graph changes, and the pressure is below 100. Pressure is below 100, right? It means when pressure level falls down, means oxygen pressure level falls down, immediately our glomus cell starts sending the signal to the higher center, that is the respiratory center, right? The respiratory center decides about the new rate of ventilation to improve the concentration of oxygen. So that is why you can see at 100 or up to 100 millimeter mercury, the rate of ventilation was 1. But once it is reduced to, or it is reached to 80 or less, suddenly the rate of ventilation increases, almost 5 times increases. So why there is a changes? Why there is an increase in ventilation rate? The increase in ventilation rate helps to improve the concentration of oxygen in normal condition, which is essential for cellular activities, right? Similarly, if you see the rate of ventilation under some other conditions, like the partial pressure of oxygen is less and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is constant. So what will be the rate of ventilation? I repeat, here I have only mentions how the rate of ventilation changes with the decrease of partial pressure of oxygen. But the second condition is, if the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is constant and partial pressure of oxygen is reduced, so what will be the rate of ventilation? Here, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is constant, that is 40 only, right? Now we are going to see whether there is any changes in the ventilation rate with the changes of partial pressure of oxygen or not, right? So it was found that though there is a constant CO2, constant PCO2, still it needs to improve the partial pressure of oxygen. To improve the partial pressure of oxygen, it needs to changes the rate of ventilation again. That means there is no changes as such. There is no changes as such. However, partial pressure of carbon dioxide is constant, right? That means to improve the concentration of oxygen, the rate of ventilation needs to increase, and rate of ventilation only increases once the pressure reaches to less than 100 millimeter mercury. At that particular pressure, our nerve fiber sends the signals to the higher center to improve the ventilation rate as well as depth, right? Now, these are just a brief of peripheral this mode of actions of peripheral chemoreceptor, right? As I mentioned, the chemical regulations is also carried out by central chemoreceptor, right? Now, question is, what are the different conditions that is involved with the regulation of, which is involved with the central chemoreceptor mechanism? The most important things that stimulate the central chemoreceptor molecule are increase concentration of carbon dioxide and pH. Those two conditions. And there is a higher level of PCO2 and pH. In that conditions, our central chemoreceptor mechanisms acts in different way, right? In the central chemoreceptor mechanisms or central chemoreceptor molecules are very much sensitive to H plus ion, right? How this H plus ion molecule or concentration of H plus ion alters the activity of central chemoreceptor. As I mentioned, the central chemoreceptors involves the central nervous system. It means the receptors are basically present in the CNS. So you can see from here, the central chemoreceptors molecules are basically present in the medulla oblongata or in the region of VRG, that is ventral respiratory group. And this central chemoreceptor molecules are very much sensitive to increased level of PCO2 and pH. More specifically, we can say these receptors are very much sensitive to H plus ion. Right? Now, what is the mode of actions of central chemoreceptor molecule? How it helps to maintain the normal partial pressure of carbon dioxide, how it helps to maintain, how it improves the normal pH level. See here, this is the blood capillary. The carbon dioxide molecules present in this capillary are based on the number of CO2 molecules present in this capillary. The partial pressures of these molecules is suppose more than normal, and this is one conditions or our central chemoreceptor molecules are sensitive to this carbon dioxide molecule, right? This is cerebrospinal fluid layer. In between capillary and cerebrospinal fluid layer, there is a barrier, right? It is also known as blood-brain barrier, right? The most important property of this blood-brain barrier is it allows the carbon dioxide molecule, not the H plus ion molecule, right? It means through this blood-brain barrier, the carbon dioxide molecules easily can pass, but it prevents the entry of H plus ion, right? Once the carbon dioxide molecules enters into the CSF, it reacts with the water molecule present in the CSF, right? Here in the CSF, there is an important enzyme that catalyzes the reaction. The name of the enzyme is carbonic anhydrase, right? And after the reactions of both of these, it produces carbonic acid. Again, it is break down into H plus HCO3 minus. Now, in the CSF, the concentration of H plus ion is very high, right? Along with this CSF layer, chemoreceptors are there, right? Central chemoreceptors are there. With the increase of H plus ion concentration, it stimulates the central chemoreceptor molecule, right? Once stimulated, again it responds according to the concentration of H plus ion presence in the CSF, right? So what is the response? The response is again changes in the ventilation rate. At initial point of time, the concentration of carbon dioxide was more than normal. In CSF, it needs to maintain the normal amount of CO2 as well as it needs to maintain the normal amount of H plus ion only, not more than that. Right? So, once it gets the stimulations, immediately it responds or it gives response by changing the ventilation rate. Now again, here the ventilation rate means in this particular conditions, the rate of expiration should be more, so that the more amount of carbon dioxide that was present in the CSF will wash out. Right? That was the objectives of the regulation, mainly by central chemoreceptor. So what we have seen here, initial point of time in CSF, the H plus ion was more, or you can say in CSF, carbon dioxide molecules was more, so the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is also high. That is not normal. Our respiratory systems has a specific regulatory mechanism. So this regulatory mechanism involves some central chemoreceptor that respond against the high concentration of H plus ion in CSF. So what is the response? The response is it improves the ventilation rate, mainly it increases the expiration or rate of expiration, so that extra amount of carbon dioxide that was deposited in the CSF can be washed out and helps to regain or help to maintain the normal partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So this is what is the chemical regulation of respirations. Here we have discussed two things. One is peripheral and other one is central. Right? Similar to the previous one, you also can see the rate of ventilation with the changes of PCO2 from this graph. See here in x-axis, the upper one, you see the partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and in the same graph it shows the effect of pH in alveolar ventilation rate. From red curve you can see up to 40 mm mercury, or when partial pressure of carbon dioxide was 40, up to this rate of ventilation was normal, that is around 1. Right? Now, as the level of carbon dioxide is very high, it needs to improve the rate of ventilation or change the rate of ventilation. So, now you can say from here, when the partial pressure is more than 80 or more than 90, it means pressure is very high. That is why the peak of the graph is there. Means rate of ventilation is very high, so that the carbon dioxide molecules can revert back to the normal. The same case you can see how the pH molecule or pH or blood pH affects the alveolar ventilation rate. That is this one, right? At initial point of time, suppose the pH is around 7.6, right? 7.6, now it gradually decreases, right? Once it reaches to the 7 or below 7, suddenly there is an increase in ventilation rate. So simple thing is what we have seen here. This G molecule, partial pressure of oxygen, partial pressure of carbon dioxide, and pH, they all are equally important based on the pressure or based on the concentration of H plus ion, our respiratory center respond. They either increase the ventilation rate that ultimately helps to maintain the optimum conditions. They help to maintain the homeostatic balance of blood chemistry. So this is what is the chemical regulation of respiration.